All right, we're recording. Let me share. All right, today we are doing system hacking, which is module 6. Yesterday, Monday, we did vulnerability analysis. Let's see, the learning objectives for this module. Demonstrate different password cracking and vulnerability exploitation techniques to gain access to the system. Privilege escalation techniques. Let's see, techniques for hiding malicious programs, for maintaining remote access, and then techniques to hide evidence of a compromised system. Now, if you have any questions, please stop me as we cruise through these. Okay, Microsoft authentication, security accounts or SAM database, Windows Store. Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't turned off Discord. Okay. Windows stores user passwords in SAM or in the Active Directory database and domains. Passwords are never stored in clear text and are hashed, and the results are stored in the SAM. NTLM authentication. The NTLM authentication protocol types are as follows: NTLM authentication protocol and LM authentication protocol. These protocols store the user's passwords in the SAM database using different hashing methods. And then there's Kerberos authentication. Microsoft has upgraded its default authentication protocols to Kerberos, which provides a stronger authentication for client-server applications than NTLM. And you'll see that little window over on the side is your generic Windows security credentials box. How hash passwords are stored in Windows SAM. Okay, so this is what this looks like. This is an example here on the top. Sheila/test password hash looks like this. And that's just examples because they can look all sorts of different things. So LM hashes have been disabled in Windows Vista and later Windows operating systems. LMs will be blank in those systems. And you can see here, username, ID, LM hash, and then NTLM hash. So when it's talking about the later ones, that we will see that blank right there. NTLM authentication process. Okay, so step 1, user types password into your login window. And then Windows runs password through its hashing algorithm. Computer sends login request to the domain controller. Domain controller sends login challenge. Computer sends response to challenge. Domain controller compares computer's response with response it created with its own hash. If they match, the login is a success. And then they have a nice little note. Microsoft has upgraded default authentication protocol to Kerberos. So you should see Kerberos instead of NTLM. This is just kind of a historical showing you what's going on. All right, Kerberos. This is how this works. So you have your client, your database, your authentication server, and ticket granting server, and then you'll see your application server. Okay, so user request to authenticate server goes over to the server, reply of authentication server to user request. Request to ticket granting server, reply of ticket granting server to client request. Then request to application server to access a service. Then reply to prove it prove it really is the server the client is expecting. So that is what Kerberos authentication looks like. Okay, password cracking. Password cracking techniques are used to recover passwords from the computer system. Attackers use password cracking techniques to gain unauthorized access to vulnerable systems. And just so you know, next week we'll be doing some hashing stuff for fun. Most of the password cracking techniques are successful because of weak or easily guessable passwords. Okay, types of password attacks. There's non-electric attacks. The attacker does not need technical knowledge to crack the password. Hence, it's known as a non-technical attack. These are your shoulder surfing, social engineering, dumpster diving. Active online attacks. The attacker performs password cracking by directly communicating with the victim's machine. So dictionary attack, brute forcing, and rule-based attacks, Trojan spyware, keyloggers, password guessing or spraying, hash injection attack, mask attack, internal monologue, LLM, excuse me, I'm going to grab a drink because apparently I'm going to choke myself. LLMNR, NBT, NS poisoning, cracking Kerberos passwords. And there's passive online attacks. The attacker performs cracking without communicating with the authorizing party. So that's your wire sniffing, man-in-the-middle attacks, or what's called a replay attack. Offline attacks. The attacker copies the target's password files and then tries to crack passwords on his own system in a different location. Rainbow table attacks, which are actually a lot of fun to play with. But that's pre-computed hashes. So if it's hashed, it doesn't work as well. And then there's distributed network attacks. Okay, non-electronic attacks. So our social engineering, basically, there's tons of different ways to do this. Social engineering is convincing people to reveal passwords. Now, that's a very simplified way to say that, but you use psychological tactics to convince people to give you the information or to give you the passwords themselves. Shoulder surfing is looking at either the user's keyboard or screen while they are logging in, and then dumpster diving is searching for sensitive information in the user's trash bins, printer, trash bins, and in or on the user's desk for sticky notes. You would not believe the amount of times that I have gone out to fix people's computers and they have a sticky note on the underside of their keyboard. Please do not do this. And if you have clients that are doing this, please tell them not to do this. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause. Let me see how much is through here. Ooh, these are long. Okay. I was going to stop and tell you, oh, I'm going to do that anyway. I'm going to stop and show you because a lot of them don't use this, but I have done a lot of work on social engineering. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of extra research from me on the psychology behind social engineering. So give me just 1 second here. I think I still have the Hi, kitty cat. That's my leg. I just need to find the one that has the right slides in it. Sorry, guys. While I'm looking for this, is there anyone that has done work with social engineering? Are you guys just quiet because did we die? You're alive, unfortunately. Okay. I'm just trying to find the one so that you guys, because they have what's called the 6 principles, and they never talk about it in here. But there is a psychological background that tells you exactly how the cyber social engineering works. There we go. There we go. Psychology of social engineering. Okay, so there are what's called the 6 principles of persuasion. And I will share this with you. Okay, you guys see that okay? No. All right, so these are actually from a man who did psychological background on salesmen, and then they found out that these actually worked the same way with people who did social engineering. So there's the principle of liking. People like those who like them. Principle of reciprocity. People repay in kind. Principle of social proof. People follow the lead of similar others. So if they think that you are like them, they are more likely to follow your lead. Principle of consistency. People align with their clear commitments. That means if they've done it once, they're likely to do it again. Principle of authority. We've talked about this a lot. People to defer to experts. So if they think you're in charge, even if you aren't, they're likely to follow you. And then there's what's called the principle of scarcity. Now, this one is used a lot. People want more of what they can have less of. Let me go the other way. And so this is how they're used then. If we like someone, we're more likely to acquiesce to their requests. Each time we receive something, for reciprocity, each time we receive something positive from a person, it produces a desire to reciprocate. Social proof, it's easier to convince someone to do something similar people, I believe, is acceptable. So if you say, hey, Cindy, Judy, and Bob, who are all in your social circle, are doing this, then you are more likely to convince the person to do that. Principle of consistency, if you engage in something consistently, you will be more likely to continue that activity. So that's why they send the same things over and over and over again, because if they nail you with it once, you're more likely to do it again. Principle of authority, society is conditioned to trust experts and authority figures. And principle of scarcity, give them something unique, that's the key, or exclusive, to get more out of them. Okay. So that's it. That's the big deal. Yeah, it's about motions and relax and everything. So they use these to override basically your common sense and force you to feel like you're in one of those 6 situations in order to get you to do what they want you to do. Now, I could talk all day about this, but that's the psychology behind it. But there are a lot of people that have access to this and realize, oh, hey, these are the psychological cues, and this person's trying to manipulate me. So that's why we train people in this. All right, active online attacks are dictionary, brute force, and rule-based. Dictionary attacks, which I think I'll probably make something for you guys so you can play with that. A dictionary file is loaded into the cracking application that runs against user accounts. Brute force attack, the program tries every combination of characters until the password is broken. Usually you need something in order to do that. You need to have a lot of oomph behind the machine. And then there's a rule-based attack. This attack is used when the attacker gets some information about the password. So password spraying attacks and mass attacks are next. Password spraying, you get multiple targets, and then you try to spray basically these people simultaneously and crack the passwords using a small set of commonly used passwords. So you can use things like crack map exec to automate the password spraying process to crack domain and workgroup members' passwords. So you can see that down here, which is on Parrot. And mask attack. Attackers recover passwords from hashes, with a specific set of characters based on some sort of information known about the attacker. Then they use Hashcat to perform mask attacks. Hashcat's a lot of fun if you haven't used it before. It's available on, it's on Kali and probably on Parrot too. Active online attacks, password guessing. Frequency of attacks are less. Failure rate is high. So the attacker creates a list of all possible passwords from the information collected through social engineering or any other way to and manually inputs them on the victim's machine to crack the password. Find valid user, create a list of possible, these are the steps. Create a list of possible passwords, rank passwords from high to low probability, key in each password until the correct password is discovered. This is incredibly time consuming and a lot of people just plain don't use this one. Default passwords. Now this one is used. Default passwords is a password supplied by the manufacturer with new equipment that is password protected. The attacker uses default passwords present in a list of words or a dictionary, and they use that to perform password guessing attacks. So this is pretty much the only time that you will see the password guessing attack work fairly well, because they have a list of stuff that you have the combination of a known list of passwords, and then you also have non-updated security that was causing this nice dual opening. Active online attacks, Trojan, spyware, and keyloggers. The attacker installs a Trojan, spyware, or keylogger on the victim's machine to collect victims' usernames and passwords. They run in the background and send back all user credentials to the attacker. So you can see here, attacker infects victim's local PC. And you can see here, victim logs into the domain server with his or her credentials. Then the Trojan, spyware, or keylogger sends login credentials to the attacker, and then the attacker gains access to the domain server. Active online attacks, hash injection, pass the hash attacks. A hash injection or PTH attack allows an attacker to inject a compromised hash into a local session and use the hash to validate network resources. The attacker finds and extracts a logged on domain admin account hash. The attacker uses the extracted hash to log on to the domain controller, and we'll go through the steps here. So user logs in. Logged on hashes are stored in the SAM file. Let's see, compromise, let's see, the attacker, compromise server using local remote exploit, extracts a logged on domain account, domain admin account hash, and then injects a compromised hash into the local session. Active online attacks, LLMNR, NBT, NS poisoning. So LLMNR and NBNTS are the two main elements of Windows operating system that are used to perform name resolution for hosts present on the same link. The attacker cracks the NTLMv2 hash obtained from the victim's authentication process. The extracted credentials are used to log into the host system in the network. Okay, so host sends incorrect host name. Then the data server says not found. Then user performs that broadcast to find out if anyone knows. And then the attacker responds saying, hey, I know. And the server accepts that one and sends an error message. So here on the right, you can see that is a spoofing tool. They're using Ubuntu in this case, and you can see what they're doing. They've got a nice little red outlined one showing us the session there. Okay, active online attack, internal monologue attack. This doesn't mean just talking to yourself. Attackers perform an internal monologue attack using SSPI or Security Support Provider Interface from a user mode application where a local procedure call to the NTLM authentication package is invoked to calculate the net NTLM response in the context of the logged on user. Okay, so here's how this goes. Disable the security controls of the net NTLM v1, extract all the non-network logged on tokens from all active processes, interact with NTLM SSP locally to obtain the net NTLM v1 response, restore security controls of net NTLM v1, crack NTLM hash using rainbow table, use the cracked hashes to gain system level access. Right, cracking Kerberos passwords. This is a bit more difficult. Attacker requests a TGT from the KDC in the form of an ASREC packet and crack the ticket to obtain the user's password. Okay, so here's the steps for this. Discover user account with pre-authentication disabled. Request TGT. Receive TGT. Crack TGT and obtain password to access service. Then they go into the application server. Notice how they're glossing over. There's a lot of difficult problems there. You have to discover the user account with the pre-authentication disabled, and then you have to crack the TGT as well. Kerberosting. The attacker requests a TGS for the SPN of the target service account and crack the ticket to obtain the user's password. Okay, so this one, they request TGT, receive TGT, request TGS, receive TGS, then crack TGS to obtain password to access service. And there's pass the ticket attack. Your brain is already Kerberoasting. That's a good one. Pass the ticket is a technique used for authenticating a user to a system that is using Kerberos without providing the user's password. To perform this attack, the attacker dumps Kerberos tickets of legitimate accounts using credential dumping tools. The attacker then launches a pass the ticket attack either by stealing the STTGT from an end user machine or by stealing the STTGT from a compromised authentication server. The attacker uses the retrieved ticket to gain unauthorized access to the target network services. Tools such as Mimikatz, Rubes, and Windows Credentials Editor are used by attackers to launch attacks. And here is Mimikatz. This allows the attackers to pass Kerberos TGT to other computers and sign in using the victim ticket. It also helps in extracting plain text passwords, hashes, PIN codes, and Kerberos tickets from memory. Okay, there are some other online attacks. The combinator attack. This one, attackers combine the entries of one dictionary with those of a second dictionary to generate a new word list to crack the password of a target system. Fingerprint attack. Attackers break down the passphrase into fingerprints comprising single and multi-character combinations to crack complex passwords. Prints attack. It is an advanced version of the combinator attack where the attacker uses a single input dictionary to build chains of combined words instead of taking input from two different dictionaries. Toggle case attack. Attacker attempts all possible combinations of upper and lowercase versions of a word present in the input dictionary. Markov chain attack. Attackers gather a password database and split each password entry into 2 to 3 character long syllables. Using the character elements, a new alphabet is developed, which is then matched with the existing password database. And then there's GPU-based attacks. Attackers exploit the OpenGL API on GPUs to set up a spy on the victim device that infers user activities and passwords enter on a browser. All right, take a minute, take a deep breath. We're going on to passive online attacks. Now, though, The reason these are so massive is there are just lots and lots of many flavors of attacks. I'm sorry, it's probably going to be a bit overwhelming. So this one, I would suggest rereading and going over the video again. Attackers run packet sniffers. So we're talking about wire sniffing. Packet sniffer tools on the local area network to access and record the raw network traffic. The captured data may include sensitive information such as passwords, like FTP, our login sessions, etc., and emails. Sniffed credentials are used to gain unauthorized access to the target system. You can see they have a nice little wire sniffing, computationally complex, too hard to perpetrate. And then you see victim, attacker, victim. Man in the middle, or manipulator in the middle, and replay attacks. In a man in the middle attack, the attacker acquires access to the communication channels between the victim and the server to extract the information needed. In a replay attack, just 1 second, packets and authentication tokens are captured using a sniffer. After the relevant information is extracted, the tokens are placed back on the network to gain access. The considerations are it's relatively hard to perpetrate, depending on some variables. You must be trusted on one or both sides and can sometimes be broken by invalidating traffic. So here is an example of what it looks like. So you have the original connection in blue between the victim and the web server. And then you have an example here of where the attacker literally sits in between the traffic to get the information. One thing that makes it easier is if you have someone that's logged into unsecured connections, like free Wi-Fi and things like that. Rainbow table attacks. Okay, a rainbow table is a pre-computed table that contains word lists like dictionary files, brute force lists, and other hash values. Kitty, kitty, I love you. Yes, kiss, kiss. The hash of passwords is captured and compared with the pre-computed hash table. If a match is found, then the password gets cracked. It is easy to recover passwords by comparing the captured password hashes to the pre-computed tables. Tool to create rainbow tables is RTGen. The RTGen program needs several parameters to generate a rainbow table. The syntax for the command line is as follows, and you can see it there. I've used some of these when I've had to break into, like, say someone locks you out with an administrator password and you have to fix the computer, and I've had to use rainbow tables in order to get in and break into the computer and get information. So it's actually kind of fun to do. So that's a good one to research. Offline attacks, distributed network attack, or DNA techniques, is used for recovering passwords from hashes or password protected files using the unused processing power of machines across the network. The DNA manager is installed on a central location where machines running on the DNA client can access it over the network. The DNA manager coordinates the attack and allocates small portions of the key search to machines that are distributed over the network. The DNA client runs in the background, consuming only unused processor time. The program combines the processing capabilities of all the clients connected to the network and uses it to crack the password. Okay, and then you have password recovery toolkits. There's something, this one's called LCOM, Distributed Password Recovery. It breaks complex passwords, recovers strong encryption keys, and unlocks documents in a production environment. And you can see there's some over here. Hashcat, we will use probably, I think I have a lab that I made that I think you guys will have a lot of fun with. So there's PW dump to extract password hashes. Extracts the LM and NTLM password hashes for local user accounts from the security account manager. And here are some other ones to extract password hashes. Password cracking using domain password auditing tools, or DPAP. It's a Python script that generates passwords using statistics from password hashes dumped from a domain controller and a password crack file such as hashcat pot generated using hashcat. It generates an HTML report with clickable links, which an attacker can open to analyze usernames, current passwords, and other password statistics. Loft crack and off crack, those I believe are both available on Kali. Loftcrack is a tool designed to audit passwords and recover applications. Offcrack is a Windows password cracker. Okay, so no, that one's not. That's just Windows, based on Rainbow's tables, and comes with a GUI interface and runs on multiple passwords. So that one would be a good one for you guys to play with if you want to play with it on Windows. Rainbow crack cracks hashes with Rainbow tables. It uses a time memory trade-off algorithm to crack the hashes. John the Ripper, that's another one. That is a fun program to use. Password salting. Okay. If you are using a good password manager, you should have a high security hash, and they should be password salting. Password salting is a technique where a random string of characters are added to the password before calculating their hashes. It makes it more difficult to reverse engineer the hashes to defeat pre-computed hash attacks. So you can see here, same password, but different hashes due to different salts. Okay, defending against password cracking. Use an information security audit to monitor and track password attacks. Disallow the use of the same password during a password change. Disallowed password sharing. Most people do, but that's surprising the amount of people that do it anyway. So you have to give that one, that if you do a policy, you have to kind of give it some teeth and actually write out why it's bad and what kind of punishment can be expected. Disallow the use of passwords that can be found in a dictionary. No password 123. Do not use clear text protocols and protocols with weak encryption. Set the password change policy to 30 days. Okay, so I've got a little caveat there. Avoid storing passwords in an unsecure location. Do not use any system default passwords. NIST actually did a study where they said that changing the passwords frequently, the human behavior, because we don't like changing our passwords frequently, we are more likely to weaken those passwords if you cause them to change them more frequently than if you use a really long password with multi-factor authentication. So keep that in mind. Make passwords hard to request by requiring alphanumeric characters consisting of a combination of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. And also, this is a misconception that has been in cybersecurity for years. Complexity is not always what makes the passwords uncrackable. It's length. Yes, it's better if you throw in extra characters and numbers and things, because that makes it harder. If you use just all lowercase letters, if you think about how computers work when they crack things, it would be a little easier for it to crack it. But a lot of people thought, if I make it really complex and only 8 characters, it'll be fine. It's not. You can crack an 8-character long password in less than 3 seconds with a generic computer, basically. So you have to think of the length of the password. Ensure that applications neither store passwords in memory nor write them to disks in clear text. Oh, I don't know if they say, no, they don't. It used to be 12. Actually, it's 16 for the minimum length is the best where you're at, according to NIST. I'll have to go look and see if that's been upped, but I believe 16 is the best on that. I know when I enacted that, the users screamed, but they also refused to use dual authentication. So I said, well, it's either or. It really should be both, but. All right. Ensure applications neither store passwords in memory nor write them to disks in clear text. Use random strings, salts, as a prefix or suffix to the password before encryption. Enable CSEC with the strong password to encrypt and protect SAM database. Disallow the use of passwords like date of birth, spouse, child, pet's name, the easy ones. Monitor server logs for brute force attacks on the user accounts. Lock out an account subjected to too many incorrect password guesses. Okay, so you remember the LL, MNR, NBTS, and as poisoning? There's how to defend it. Open your local policy group editor. Then go to your computer local policy, computer configuration, and administrative template, DNS client. And the DNS client, double click on turn off multi-class name resolution, and then click enable radio button, click OK. This is just to disable these features. So that's how you disable the NBTS on that one. And you can go look for that later if you want to. Here are some tools to detect that. Vindicate. It's a spoofing detection toolkit. And Respounder helps security professionals detect rogue hosts running Responder on public Wi-Fi networks. Vulnerability exploitation involves the execution of multiple complex interrelated steps to gain access to a remote system. Here are the steps. Identify vulnerability. Determine the risk associated with vulnerability. Determine capability of the vulnerability. Develop exploit. Select method for delivering local or remote. Generate and deliver payload, and then gain remote access. Exploit sites. So these are some examples that you can go to. Buffer overflow. I think we talked about this a couple of times. Buffer is an area of adjacent memory locations allocated to program or application to handle its runtime data. Buffer overflow or overrun is common vulnerability in an application or program that accepts more data than the allocated buffer. This vulnerability allows application to exceed the buffer while writing data to the buffer and overwrite neighboring memory locations. The attacker exploits buffer overflow vulnerability to inject malicious code into the buffer to damage files, modify program data, access critical information, escalate privileges, gain shell access, etc. Why are programs and applications vulnerable to buffer overflow? Lack of boundary checking, using old versions of programming languages, that's the one I see the most, using unsafe and vulnerable functions, lack of good programming practices, that's the other one I see, failing to set proper filtering and validation principles, executing code present in the stack segment, improper memory allocation, and insufficient input sanitization. It depends on the type of attack. I think that we're talking about those next right here. So these are the different types of buffer overflow attacks. There's what's called a stack-based buffer overflow. A stack is used for static memory allocation and stores the variables in the last in, first out order. There are two stack operations. Push stores the data into the stack, and pop removes the data from the stack. If an application is vulnerable to stack-based buffer overflow, attackers then take control of the EIP register to replace the return address of the function with the malicious code that allows them to gain shell access to the target system. Okay, so you see your stacks here, your normal stack, data on stack segment, end of stack, and then there's the stack when attack function calls. You have the data on stack, return address, more data on stack, end of stack. And you can see how they throw those in the middle here. And then stack when attacker overflow buffer in function to smash the stack. So you have data on stack, new return address, overwritten data on segment, end of stack. So you can see that new return address, malicious code. So it goes over here and starts writing stuff instead of doing what it's supposed to do. Heap-based buffer overflow. Heap memory is dynamically allocated at runtime during the execution of the program, and it stores program data. Heap-based overflow occurs when a block of memory is allocated to a heap and data is written without any bounds checking. Sorry, I've had a really bad dry throat today. This vulnerability leads to overriding dynamic object pointers, heap headers, heap-based data, virtual functions, tables, etc. The attacker exploit heap-based buffer overflow to take control of the program's execution. Unlike stack overflow, heap overflows are inconsistent and have different exploitation techniques. So you see your input, output, heap before overflow, and you have your heap after, and you can see your input output, and you can see where they've added information. It depends on what they've got in there. If it can close or glitch out, it can shut down. If they've got, depending on what type of code they've injected, sometimes it can read that code and cause escalation, privilege escalations, meaning it'll allow them to have administrative access and things like that. It can write over the top of stuff and like delete portions of the program. There are all sorts of different things that can happen depending on what type of things are in the program and how badly the program is, the programming in the program is. So if it's really badly programmed, you can have some truly spectacularly horrible results. So here you go. Here's some examples. This one's got a segmentation fault, and this one actually corrupted part of the program. Windows buffer overflow exploitation. Perform spiking, and I love the names of these. Perform fuzzing, identify offset, overwrite the EIP register, identify bad characters, identify the right module, generate shellcode, and gain root access. So spiking allows the attacker to send a crafted TCP or UDP packet to the vulnerable server in order to make it crash. It helps the attacker identify the buffer overflow vulnerabilities that are there in the target applications. So on this one, they use netcat to establish a connection with the vulnerable server, and then they generate spike templates to perform the spiking. In this one, they're using Immunity Debugger, and it registers, you can see those different options are overwritten with ASCII values. And then this one shows the vulnerable server is paused due to an access violation. So that can cause basically the whole server just sits there and goes, I don't know what to do. Fuzzing. The attacker uses fuzzing to send a large amount of data to the target server so that it experiences buffer overflow and overwrites the EIP register. It helps to identify the number of bytes required to crash the target server. This information helps in determining the exact location of the EIP register, which further helps injecting malicious shellcode. See, you can see that nice green outline, fuzzing crashed vulnerability server at, and then they have the bytes right there. And then here, access violation when reading, blah, blah, blah. Use this to pass exception to program. Identify the offset. Attackers use the Metasploit framework, pattern create and pattern offset Ruby tools to identify the offset and exact location of where the EIP register is being overwritten. So there's a nice little outline here. Buffer overflow, a vulnerable server has overwritten EIP register with random bytes. And then you can see here, exact match at offset 203. And then overwrite the EIP register allows attackers to identify whether the EIP register can be controlled and can be overwritten with malicious shellcode. And there goes more there. Identifying bad characters. Or injecting the shellcode into EIP register, attackers identify bad characters that may cause issues in the shellcode. You can obtain bad characters through Google search. Characters such as no bytes, and then you'll see that there, which are bad characters. Identifying the right module. In this step, they identify the right module of a vulnerable server that lacks memory protection. An immunity debugger, you can use scripts like this one to identify modules that lack your memory protection. And we can see here, return address of vulnerable module, and there's hex code for the command. And then on this one, you can see the vulnerability stuff there. Attackers use MSF venom command to generate the shellcode and inject it to the EIP register to gain shell access to target vulnerable servers. Yes, these can be huge amount of steps for one attack in case you're going, holy cow. And then you can see here, they copied this and you can dump that over here. Okay. Let's see how much further we have. Okay, not too bad. Okay. Return-oriented program attack is an exploitation technique used by attackers to execute arbitrary malicious code. An attacker hijacks the target program control flow by gaining access to the call stack and then execute arbitrary machine instructions by reusing available libraries known as gadgets. Gadgets are a collection of instructions that end with the x86 ret instruction. Attacker selects a chain of existing gadgets to create a new program and executes it with malicious intention. An ROP attack are very effective as they utilize available and legal code libraries, which are not identified by security protections as code signing and executable space protection, meaning it's easier to get these through. Exploit chaining, also referred to as vulnerability chaining, is a cyber attack that combines various exploits of vulnerabilities to infiltrate and compromise the target from its root level. During exploit chaining, an attacker first initiates reconnaissance operation and starts enumerating various digital footprints and underlying vulnerabilities one after another within the software or hardware of the target system. So you can see initiate reconnaissance, gather exploits one after another, combines exploits to compromise system, then gains access to root level services. This is an example of Active Directory enumeration using PowerView. Some of these I'm just going to kind of go, this is what this is, and go on to the next slide so you can look at them later. Domain mapping and exploitation with Bloodhound. So this one is one that you can basically go through and map out the different structure. Ghost Pack you can use to identify insecurities. You do different security checks and collect information from your host system for defensive and offensive. So you can use it as white hat, black hat, gray hat, and it can help on both sides. Buffer overflow detection tools. These are to help you avoid all that massive stuff that you have and that we went through on the other slides. Okay, defending against buffer overflows. Develop programs by following secure coding practices. There's a reason that's the number one there, because that's usually the problem. Use the address space layout randomization technique. Validate arguments and minimize code that requires root privileges. Perform code review at the source code level by using static and dynamic code analyzers. Do you remember what that means? Static means at rest, dynamic means running. Allow the compiler to add bounds to all the buffers. Implement automatic bounds checking. Always protect the return pointer on a stack. Never allow the execution of code outside the code space. Regularly patch applications and operating systems. Yes, you're going to hear that one a lot. Perform code inspection manually with a checklist to ensure the code meets certain criteria. Employ data execution prevention to mark the memory regions as non-executable. That's what you want to do so you can't execute code in those areas like they were doing. Implement code pointer integrity checking to detect whether code pointer has been corrupted before it is dereferenced. Okay. Holy cow, this is a long one. You guys need a few minutes to go grab like some caffeine, use the bathroom. Okay, go ahead and take 5 minutes and we'll be back at about a little bit after 6:10. Yeah, you have access to all the slides. All right, since this one is so very long, I'm just going to point out some stuff and then you guys can read the rest of these because a lot of this we've gone over before. It's just very granular. So privilege escalation, and then you can go look at the other types of privilege escalation. This is an attack where the attacker gains access to the network using a non-admin user account. And then the next step would be to gain admin privileges. The attacker performs a privilege escalation attack that takes advantage of a design flaw, programming error, bugs, or configuration oversight in an operating system and software application to gain admin access to network and its associated applications. The privileges then allow the attacker to view critical or sensitive information, delete files, install malicious programs, and things like that. So there are two types. There's horizontal privilege escalation. This refers to acquiring the same privileges that have already been granted by assuming the identity of another user with the same privileges. And then there's vertical privilege escalation, which refers to gaining higher privileges than those existing. Okay, I'm just going to click on these and go through. So there's DLL hijacking. There's exploitation through vulnerabilities. There's delib hijacking. You can use Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities. You can use named pipe impersonation. Misconfigured services, which we've talked about a few times. Pivoting and relaying to hacked external machines. So remember me talking about how IoT devices are a bane of a lot of security people. Well, they will get into those IoT devices and then pivot to other things. That's what we're talking about here. Misconfigured NFS. Windows sticky keys. UAC. Abusing boot or logon initialization scripts. Modifying domain policies. Domain controllers using DC sync attacks. And then there's a whole bunch here. As you can see, there's like several slides. Here are some escalation tools. All right, here are 10 steps for defending against privilege escalation. Restrict interactive logon privileges. Run users and applications with lowest privileges. Implement multi-factor authentication and authorization. Run services as unprivileged accounts. Implement a privilege separation methodology to limit the scope of programming errors and bugs. Use an encryption technique to protect sensitive data. Reduce the amount of code that runs a particular privilege. Perform debugging using bounds checkers and stress tests. Thoroughly test the system for application coding errors and bugs, and regularly patch and update the kernel. Oh, I guess we got more than 10. Change the UAC settings to always notify. Restrict users from writing files to the search paths for applications. Continuously monitor file system permissions using auditing tools. Reduce the privileges of users and groups so that only legitimate administrators can make service changes. That should be a given. Use whitelisting tools to identify and block malicious software. Use fully qualified paths in all Windows applications. Ensure that all executables are placed in write protected directories. Mac OS, use or make plist files read only. Block unwanted system utilities or software that may be used on scheduled tasks or used to schedule tasks. Regularly patch and update web servers. So here are some tools for defending against DLL and DLib hijacking. Here's some defense against Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities and some tools for that. Okay, there's a whole bunch of these. So I am going to go quickly through these. This is techniques used to hide malicious programs and maintain remote access to the system. So, executing applications. That's when your attackers use malicious applications to own the system. And then they get in remotely. These are like your keyloggers, backdoors, spyware, and crackers. As you can see, you guys can see the index on the left, right? Good. All right, so as you can see under each one, it will give you a whole bunch of information. So here's how they do that with spyware, rootkits, and TFS data streams. And we've already done steganography, so there's a nice section in here if you want to do that. And we were talking about how to detect steganography. Well, here's one to detect steganography along with a couple of other ones. And here's another one. Maintain persistence by abusing boot or logon auto start executions. That one's actually fairly common, so most people do try to defend against that. Domain dominance through different paths. So this is the process of taking control over critical assets like DCs, domain controllers on a target system, and gaining access to the network resources. Attackers employ social engineering techniques to launch domain dominance attacks through internal users. And then you can see those are the different domain dominance techniques: remote code execution, abusing data protection, malicious replication, skeleton key attack, golden ticket attack, and silver ticket attack. And you can see they go through those here. And then there are different options that you can do to remain persistent. Over the hash attack, Linux post exploitation, Windows post exploitations. And this one's actually fairly interesting, but as you can see, I don't know if you can see all that, there are a ton of different ways to cover your tracks. So I will go through this basic one, and then you guys can go through and read those at your leisure. To crack you mean like steganography files? German, is that what you're asking about? To crack there are, it's not so much cracking, but usually they have ones, since they're usually hashed. There are ones that say, hey, that this might be there, and it can, depending on the type of hash that's there, they do have programs that can kind of try to basically like reverse engineer the steganography. So yeah, they do have ones that are kind of like that. They're a little more complex. It's funny because they're a little more complex than the ones that they're actually used to create the steganography images in the first place. Okay, so covering your tracks. Once intruders have successfully gained administrator access on their system, they try to cover their tracks to avoid detection, because the longer you have access, the more stuff you can find. So you want to disable auditing, you want to clear your logs or manipulate your logs, cover your tracks on your network or operating systems, delete files or hide any artifacts, and then disable different Windows functionalities. Okay, so I'm just going to show you these different options. So disabling auditing, clear your logs. You see a couple pages here. Manually clearing event logs. Unless, well, you can do that on a server, but if you have a whole bunch of machines, it can get very tiring. There's different ways to clear your online tracks, covering bash shell tracks, tracks on the network for covering, tracks on an operating system. This is a program that you can use to delete files with. It's Cypher.exe. There's different, you can disable different Windows functionalities. You see there's a couple of different ones here. Hiding artifacts in Windows, Linux, and they have Mac OS in here. Oh, yep, down there, Mac OS. Then there are some track covering tools, DBAN, some other things. I've used CCleaner. There was a problem. It's actually a good one for cleaning. There was a problem when they were bought temporarily that there was some malware that was put out with their stuff when they switched owners, but they are actually back to being a secure tool now. So they actually have a pretty decent mobile one too. How to defend against covering tracks: activate logging functionality on all critical systems. This is probably one of the best things you can do, as well as conducting periodic audits on IT systems to ensure that logging functionality is in accordance with security policies. Ensure new events do not overwrite old entries in the log files when storage limit is exceeded. This is actually a very common thing to happen, so beware of that. Configure the appropriate and minimal permissions necessary to read and write log files. Maintain a separate logging server on the DMZ to store logs from critical servers. This is a really good idea. Regularly update and patch OSs, applications, and firmware. Close all unused open ports and services. Encrypt log files stored on the system so they cannot be altered without the appropriate decryption key. Set log files to append-only mode to prevent unauthorized deletion of log entries. Periodically back up the log files to an unalterable media. Also, if you do offsite backups, log files are an option that you would want to do for that as well. Okay. I am going to stop the recording here because this is the end of the lecture portion.